What I heard you say is if you need to get up, someone should pee on the floor.
Well, after weeks and weeks of fighting myself and trying to get up at like a normal productive human hour, all it took is the dog barking in a way that's similar to "I'm about to pee on the floor" barking, and mysteriously I woke up right away.
So detritus is the most expensive alarm clock we've ever gotten.
Yes.
Okay. Shall
It's
we
a
make a
very
podcast?
Let's make a podcast. Hello and welcome into another episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult, the show where potential went to die. I'm one of your hosts, Ellie Michaels. I use she, her.
I am your other host, Jessica Michaels. I use she, they.
How are we feeling today, Jess?
Definitely a they day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today we are talking about unique psychological challenges that gifted people face. Particularly today, we're talking about not being able to see the forest for the trees or being too caught up in the details or the potential improvements of tasks rather than actually just doing the freaking tasks.
Yes, and we will link to the video that inspired this discussion in our show notes because this is something that you and that I know you struggle with, I struggle with as well, and something I see very, very commonly with my clients, which is you'd given the example of making our big calendar. We have a big whiteboard calendar that we made, and we were kind of iterating on it. It's a scrappy, rough draft version, but you mentioned that while we were putting that together, you really had to work hard to keep yourself focused on doing, the meeting the goals of the big project, actually finishing the rough draft of the board, instead of taking the time to concentrate on making sure every line was straight and, taking things apart and fixing the labeling and making everything perfect because we just needed to get it done. Is that an accurate retelling of that situation?
Yeah, that's about right.
And it can be tough, I think. One of the things that the gifted mind does really well often is find detailed flaws, or things to edit or things to correct. And as a result of that, I think it becomes really very easy for us to lose sight of what the ultimate goal of something is, or the appropriate time frame for something is, to and we get stuck in these little details and things that make it hard to really get anything done especially in, I'm thinking in like a corporate environment where sometimes projects don't need to be 100%. I would say 120%, but that drives me crazy when people say more than
You
100.
can't have that many percents.
No, it makes me
It's
nuts.
per cent, as in shortened for century, cents as in like $100. There's 100. It's 100.
Yeah.
You're a centurion. You're one of 100. Okay, sorry. That's good.
So as where not every project needs 100% of our effort, especially if it's something like a mock-up or a draft or something like that. But that really can cause difficulty because even though the goal is just to get something done, we will often spend time on those details or portions of a project that really don't matter. And that can hurt us in a few ways. One, it can mean that we're working harder than anybody else we know
Mm-hmm.
because while people are doing their job well, but they're not focusing on all of those details when it's not appropriate, then we end up working harder. So we end up burned out. it is also upsetting, honestly, when somebody shows up with something and it's like, oh, that's all we needed to do. It's upsetting to look and go, wait, they turned in that and I did this, but we're the
Hmm.
same. How does that work? Even though nobody asked us to do above and beyond and go the extra mile for whatever it is, and then certainly there's a time and a place to for the detailed eye and to use all that energy, but it isn't all the time, every time, because it can't be, right? We just won't last that way. And then sometimes it causes us to get into, I know I had a supervisor named Jason, and he and I ultimately, I think he and I ended up liking each other, I think, and ended up working pretty well together. But we worked at it. We worked hard at that because he was very keen on figuring out the best way to work with and communicate with me, kind of in my raw neurodivergent form. He didn't want any masking. He didn't want anything. Um, and it was an interesting experience. But what would happen is we would start talking about something, a proposal or something early stages, and he would ask a question, or we would start talking about something, and it would be some tangential detail. Like maybe, we're writing a training for 600 managers, and it's going to include all of the managers, but not any of the people who have recently been promoted. It's only going to be people who've been working in their jobs for like 3 to 6 months. And maybe that is a detail, but not the most important detail. But my brain would get stuck on something like that and say, wait a minute, why are we only going to do managers who've been in their jobs for 3 to 6 months? Why are we not doing recently promoted managers? And that detail is where I would drown. I would really want to stay focused there until we got to the point where it's like, well, we're only talking about 10 people. We have a training for 600 people that we need to design. Can we not focus on this issue that affects 10 people and back away and move forward and come back to this? But my brain would want to stick there and fix that and get that set to my satisfaction before I could go on and finish. And so I think there's something about our brains that make it so that we don't want to let stuff like that go, or we want to make everything as good as it can possibly be before we move on. Problem is, it's never going to be as good as it can possibly be. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, the idea of good enough is anathema to my brain.
Hmm.
Um, and the phrase that jumps to mind is rearranging deck chairs on a Titanic. And
Hmm.
that might be a little, overly dramatic, but it's kind of the thing that we're talking about. But like the important thing is getting to the frickin' lifeboats. The important thing is not moving the chairs to be in a better organizations pattern. Um,
Hmm.
or I guess a less dire example would be, reorganizing your toolbox in the middle of building a wall or something. I should have thought of something before we started recording.
No, I
Uh,
think those are great examples because that's how, I mean, one of the key difficulties with this is scope creep, right? You set out to,
Good
to
word.
to fix the cabinet door, but then you end up opening the cabinet and going, oh, I got to clean out this cabinet. This cabinet's gross. And then you go, oh boy, but how can I fix this? Look, my tools are so out of line. And then, oh, the container with all my little screws. Somebody, opened this up upside down. So these all have to be sorted. And you've now worked for 12 hours and really done nothing. If your metric is fixing the cabinet door, you've done a lot of work, but you haven't done the thing that you need to do. So it's really easy to take on 10 projects. And that'll happen. I had a client of mine who and she is a coach as well. And she and I have traded coaching back and forth, but she and I were talking about a project that she was doing, and she was so stressed because she'd done she was doing the project, but it was something that like people were going to have to do similar things in the future. And so while she was doing the project, she was also making templates for every email, templates for every everything that would have data filled in, templates for the presentation. And that was great. But then she noticed that the company's intranet that she was storing this on was really not organized very well. And so then she started organizing all of the folders on this portal so that people could find things more easily. And she was beyond stressed because it came time, her deadline is coming up and she's got all this work to do. She's like, I've been working every night until 10 or 11 o'clock. Why? It's like, because 80% of what you've taken on wasn't in the job you set out to do. But I think something I've noticed is we can have a hard time discerning between like important and not as important, or
Mm-hmm.
prioritizing tasks. Because as soon as she figured out that, oh, she could make templates and that would make life easier in the future, those templates became as important as the presentation she was writing. But
Mm-hmm.
but they shouldn't have been, because her boss only wanted the presentation. But she assigned herself the templates and they became as critical. And then sorting the internet became as critical and as important, and became, things that she had to spend time on, so that when we get to the presentation, she's been working. I mean, it's not fair to be working for weeks and still end up at your deadline, but that's what happened. And so I think sometimes when people say, oh, I procrastinate, oh, I only do work, right at the last minute, a lot of times that is true. Sometimes, though, we are putting effort in and we are doing lots of things. We're just not necessarily doing the right thing, because every time we take in something, it gets as high a priority level as everything else that we're doing, when maybe it shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My mind immediately jumps to social hierarchies, which is an issue with uh, neurodivergent people in general. And I think gifted also has a weird skew on social hierarchies, especially when you're in a gifted program where you are told that you are different and special and not part of the ordinary hierarchy. Particularly for my case, my gifted program was very, very, very small. And so a lot of our time was very one on one with a teacher. And it was not the normal hierarchy of interacting with a teacher. So, because it had already moved me out of the regular class, and now I was getting this special attention that you don't usually get, that whole difficulty with social hierarchy things was just ratcheted up an extra little bit. Well, then also add on to that skill or task hierarchy, um,
Mm.
where it still counts as work if I've spent the last 3 hours pulling down and rearranging the lighting in my studio office because I'm doing stuff for work, and that's it. It's like, okay, but are you actually producing anything? Are you knocking tasks off your list? Are you taking care of the things that you need to take care of so you can stay employed and stay housed? It's like, well, I mean, kinda, because the lighting is, part of all of it. It's like, okay, well, you're rearranging your toolbox rather than building the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Do
like
you
building the wall. Building the wall has a negative connotation. You're rearranging your toolbox instead of fixing the door.
do you think part of that lack of lack of, I guess, normal context for hierarchy becomes, as adults, we have a skewed sense of the work that everybody else would do? And so we have our level of work and level of detail that our brain generates. Our brain looks at this project and says, here's what needs to be done, without realizing that maybe that looks very different than what non-gifted or other people would do. Because if you're like a gifted kid and all of the homework that you do and all the projects that you do are on par with all the other gifted kids, then that's your standard, you know? And I just remember coming in and the first time I saw somebody who had a report that was typed and in one of those plastic little sheets. And then from that point on, we all turned in reports that were typed in plastic sheets, even though handwritten and stapled would have been just fine, because I'm old and that's what we would have done. Um,
I
so
think we're
I'm
old
just
just for having handed in physical reports. Like,
Oh, good point. Instead of emailing, do they? Oh, I suppose they email now, don't they? Or like put them in a
now they
portal or something.
airdrop.
Oh God. Oh God. But
I don't
I'm
actually know.
wondering if like some of those extras, that those extra efforts and things, those extra, because I think part of what a gifted brain does really well is make leaps in patterns, right? Which is great. But it can see 10 steps ahead. But I think sometimes that's problematic because those 10 steps ahead give you more work to do.
Mm,
And when that's what you're used to, when that's your standard, and if you're growing up in a gifted household or if you are a gifted adult, that is your standard. But then that isn't really a good comparison necessarily with what the true expectation is. I had a president, a company president that I was working for, and I was working, like, he was signing my overtime. He was signing my overtime. And then he was like, why do you work so much overtime? I'm like, well, I have so much stuff to do. We were working on this, this big event that we were doing, and there was so much to be done. And he's like, why do you, as just, and he didn't mean this condescendingly. He's like, but why, as you, as just an employee, why do you have more responsibility in this event than I do as the president? Do you think your time is worth more than my time? Or is your job more important than my job? I'm like, well, no. And so we looked at some of the stuff that we were doing, and he had everything nicely labeled and organized, totally serviceable. I had individually tagged every single container of stuff that people were going to pick up with, and also decided that we should have little cards that we gave to everybody that had little instructions, instead of just one big instruction sheet. Like, we had basically just approached the task so differently because I was thinking, what is the most we could do? And he was thinking, what is the most efficient, like serviceable way we could do things? And when I've worked as a manager, I had there was one of the first people I ever hired, and she was a delight, and definitely gifted adult. And that was one of the first problems that I had to sort of figure out how to deal with as a manager is I have an employee who is so like she's giving herself these parameters for work that I don't know where she's getting them. I have never told her she needed to do anything like this. And she would talk about how stressed out she was and how hard the job was and how difficult everything was. And it's like, but why? I am not asking you to do any of the things that you're doing. Why do you feel like you need to do them? Your coworkers aren't doing them. They're also not as stressed. And she just couldn't really see that. And I'm wondering if that has to do with the fact that our brain looks at everything and sees 10 times more stuff that we could potentially do. And we're just used to operating that way.
I think that's a big part of it. And I think we also talked before about it's not really catastrophizing, it's extrapolating. You
Hmm.
know, in the trunk of our car, there is, you know, jumper cables, and there is a full size spare under the, mat thing, and there is a rather large first aid kit that's actually a backpack full of various first aid stuff and an emergency blanket and flares. And I think that there's like a hand crank radio flashlight combo, and there's uh oh, we're stuck somewhere, cold blankets. We we don't go anywhere other than the grocery store. Like, we live in Colorado, and that's, there's parts of that's area that want to kill us, but we don't go to those places. We don't drive in the mountains. We don't go skiing, but we're aware that all of these things could happen. We're aware that these are challenges that we may well face, and gosh darn it, we're going to be prepared for when it happens.
We've got several of those things that like punch out the car window if you're underwater. Um,
Oh yeah, that
in
episode of Mythbusters, that seared onto my soul.
we're in
Plus,
a
plus,
oh,
Jamie Heineman from Mythbusters was driving with his daughter, and they hit some ice, and they skidded into a big reservoir pond thing, and he had to use the things that they had learned on the Mythbusters episode about being in a car that's in water and surviving. And he, waited until the pressure was equalized and then smashed the window and then saved himself and his daughter. So it's important
see,
to
it
have
could
a
happen.
bunch of window breakers
But I think,
in a
when we
desert.
but when we talk about gifted kid, messy adult, or gifted adult, messy adult, I think this can be a lot of where that comes from, this self-imposed set of requirements of what we should do or what we need to do or what the level of our work should be, or our low tolerance for things that are not perfect. That adds so much stress and so much extra time. And I have seen it. This isn't something I think that you or I tend to experience, but I have seen it create a lot of judgment in people, where they will judge their colleagues and coworkers for not wanting to produce at that particular level, or not, people that aren't going kind of that above and beyond when, and so it just, there's so many ways that that sets you up for negativity in your life, whether it's trouble, at work, or being unsatisfied, or not getting along with coworkers, or being overworked and burnt out, being stressed, or feeling like at home you're always behind. You're just never, you've removed any point where you could be satisfied, or where you could think, yeah, I'm okay. And it's just stress all the time. And that is really hard to move away from that and enjoy any part of your life when so many of the big parts of your life are just shrouded in like cortisol and adrenaline and anger. It's tough. So that to me is definitely a recipe for a messy adult.
Yeah, and so much of your attention and your effort is wrapped up in hypotheticals and things that won't ever actually happen. So, we're prepared for a snowstorm in the car, but we forgot to update our registration for like 2 years. Like, oops.
Are bad. Definitely are bad.
And I'm not saying that's because we burned out all of our attention and effort on this other superfluous thing of what might happen, but that really can't have helped.
To be
Um,
fair, we were moving.
yeah.
We
And,
that excuses that week span of that 2 year time frame. So we were
it's
moving.
it's been like a year, and we're still there. There's still stuff in places in our apartment that's because that's where that box got set down. And it's like, yeah, sure, this closet, that all goes in this closet. Great. Okay, moving on.
This is temporary. This isn't gonna last like this. This is just for right now.
Yeah,
Ah,
we'll find a better solution for this.
we'll get there. We'll get there.
Narrator, they did not find a
They
better
did that.
solution for this.
I think, so what can people do if this is something that they struggle with? Because I just kept thinking of that board that we were working on. I easily could see how that would have gone, which is we wouldn't have finished it. We would have ended up with a fourth of the board done in perfect rows and
Mm-hmm.
perfectly labeled, and none of the rest of it done. So it wouldn't have been usable. And it would have ended up abandoned in the corner until we got back to it, because it just would have been too much and we wouldn't have gotten done what we needed to do. So if you are a person who struggles with this particular psychological need of gifted brains, what do we suggest?
Well, first I want to point out that the board itself wasn't the task. The tasks are our outreach and social media posting and my video production stuff. And it was like laying out the tasks that have to get done every week and making sure that we have an ongoing record of this to remind us. So the board wasn't even the task, it was the setup for the tasks. And yes, we could have completely gotten lost in just redoing the board. Um, I think the thing that works the best for me is you gotta Porkins it. The in the end of A New Hope, when they're making the attack on the Death Star, there's that one kind of big guy X fighter or X wing pilot named Jet Porkins, because it's Star Wars, and of course, uh, and his whole thing was, he was being told to stay on target, like stay on target, he's like, oh, there's this thing and this thing, stay on target, and or stay on mission, or you gotta check in every once in a while, a couple of times a day for me, usually around like break time. Every 2 hours you stop what you're doing and have some water and a snack and whatever, and check in, and like, am I am I fixing the door, or am I rearranging my tools?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not fixing the door, then okay, can I stop rearranging my tools and get back to the door? Or what do I need to do to stop rearranging the tools? Can I just throw everything back in the toolbox and then get back to the door?
Mm-hmm.
Or
I think from another perspective, sometimes even in the planning stages, it helps to work backwards. Like, what is your ultimate goal? And then backtrack from there. What are the steps that need to happen to get that ultimate goal completed successfully and on time, whatever that is. And then anything that doesn't roll up directly into that goal, that needs to be something that we deprioritize. Or, hey, you can get back to that after all these other things that are necessary to go into that ultimate goal after they've been completed. So after you've done the project, go ahead and make your templates. Go for it. After you've gotten the first draft, kind of roughed in, then go and create your own font, but do the main things first and then come back to these side things, though that can be really helpful too, to sort of keep yourself on track.
I like it. Or make sure you're following the main quest. You're not sidetracked on side quests. The in the it's one of my favorite references in the Fallout TV show is that, yeah, well, the wasteland has its own golden rule. Thou shalt be distracted by random crap every time. Because that's how the Fallout games always work. It's like, oh, look, this big main story. Where's my dad? Where's my son? Who shot me in the head? You have these great big mysteries you're trying to solve, but then someone's like, hey, could you help me, collect 15 aluminum cans? And you're like, absolutely. because I want to finish the quest and get the rewards and get the little hit of dopamine that says that I'm a productive and useful person.
And by all means, write those side quests down, because we tend to kind of hold things open in our minds until we've done something with them. So jot them down so that you don't forget, what you wanted to go back and do, and then, reevaluate later. Sometimes when we're in the heat of the moment, things seem really, really important or like they would be really life-changing. And then you go back and look later and it's like, maybe that isn't quite the big deal that I thought it was going to be at the time. So, but capture those ideas so that you don't feel like you're going to lose them, and then, take another look. So hopefully we can de-stress a little bit as we're going about our lives.
Yeah, I'm going to change to that from the toolbox and the door thing. Are you doing the main quest line, or is this a side quest?
This is a side quest.
There we go. Well, I think that'll just about wrap it up for this episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult. If you like the show and would like to support us, please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe and rate us on YouTube at Gifted Kid Messy Adult. You can find us on Facebook at Gifted Kid Messy Adult. I'm actually updating that now. If you'd like to support us financially, you can find us on Patreon at the Neurodiverse Workplace, where subscribers get access to all kinds of bonus content, curated memes, behind the scenes shenanigans, voting on future topics, and you can help us keep the lights on here and at home, while also helping us provide free resources and support for our fellow neurodivergent adults. If you'd like to suggest a future topic or just say nice things and give us that sweet, sweet external validation, please email us your thoughts, questions, or praise to giftedkidmessyadult@gmail.com. Jess, where can people find you?
CoachJessicaMichaels.com.
And if you're looking for me or some customized commercial video solutions, you can find me at elliemichaelsproductions.com. And if you'd like to help us fight the American healthcare system and help keep me alive, we have a GoFundMe right now. Just search for Jess and Ellie's Fight for Health. Links to all of these will be in the show notes. And until next time, take care of each other out there.
Bye.